They landed in the US with nothing but the clothes on their backs, but what they did have was passion and great taste buds. Because of that, the Italian immigrants managed to create food that would have been in any five-star restaurant, when in reality, they were just making something they loved, something that reminded them of the home they left behind. These are 8 forgotten pasta recipes from the 1930s, which will blow your mind. Pasta with mushrooms and butter. When autumn crept into New York and house walls turned cold in Little Italy, the air was filled with the smell of mushrooms. But you might ask, weren't fresh mushrooms too expensive? Yes, you're right. But Italian nonnas had a trick up their sleeves. They simply grabbed dried mushrooms, dropped them into warm water, and went on with their other jobs. The result was a dark, woodsy, and impossibly rich liquid. It was then strained, reduced, and folded right into a simple butter sauce. One bite was all that was needed, and suddenly you were not in New York anymore. You were home. Mamma mia! Mushrooms and butter might have felt like a warm embrace. However, what comes next was anything but gentle. Pasta puttanesca. When Italian immigrants packed into Little Italy, life was exhausting, money was tight, and dinner was technically a luxury and not a guarantee. Enter pasta puttanesca, arguably the boldest and the most ingenious thing ever to hit a stovetop. And here's a little-known fact about this meal. Every single ingredient had a backstory. For the anchovies, Italians often grabbed them cheaply from the docks. Then there were the olives that were borrowed from a neighbor's jar, probably without asking. Capers, red pepper, and garlic were all assembled into one pan and bubbled furiously like they had somewhere to be. 15 minutes later, the meal was ready. And the result? A sauce so aggressively flavorful, it practically introduced itself to the whole building. Some call it cooking, the Italians called it a personality. The next dish needed nothing but silence, patience, and 3 humble ingredients. Macaroni with tomato and garlic. With this meal, it was as though Italian mamas were performing alchemy. A few garlic cloves went into hot oil and were cooked until golden but not burned, because burned garlic in an Italian kitchen is basically a criminal offense. Then came the tomatoes, which were simmered on low heat. Patience was also a key ingredient here, as the simmering was not to be rushed. In the end, you got the kind of sauce that crept through every hallway and pulled the whole family to the table without a single word spoken. Baked pasta with seafood. You see, down at the docks, fishermen were practically giving away broken mussels, tiny clams, and fish scraps, the kind of pieces the fancy restaurants wouldn't look at twice. Italian immigrant mothers saw dinner for their families. Everything came together in one pan. Pasta, tomato sauce, the so-called throwaway seafood pieces, all blanketed in breadcrumbs and slid into the oven. And if you've ever been in a kitchen with baking garlic, seafood, and caramelizing breadcrumbs all hitting your nose at once, you understand the kind of aroma that was filling those houses. Then the oven opened, and you were met with golden edges and bubbling sauce. That unmistakable aroma of the sea folded into something warm and deeply satisfying. Pasta allo scarpariello. A cobbler walks into a kitchen. What comes out? One of Naples' greatest pasta dishes. No, seriously. Legend has it that when Neapolitan shoemakers found themselves short on cash but long on ingenuity, they started trading handmade shoes for whatever cheese and tomatoes locals could spare. And then they cooked, because when you're Italian, hunger is simply a creative challenge in disguise. When melted together into a hot tomato base, they created something almost impossible to explain. It was silky, fiery, and deeply complex. Those who tasted it described it as a sauce that made cheap pasta taste like it cost a week's wages. This next dish did it with just one single ingredient: fettuccine al burro. Before Alfredo became a restaurant menu staple, there was just butter. And in Little Italy's immigrant kitchens, that butter was everything. It was not taken for granted or scooped carelessly. It was measured, respected, and treated like the precious commodity it genuinely was in the 1930s. It's funny that something so stripped back, wide fettuccine ribbons, a knob of slowly browning butter, and a whisper of grated cheese, if luck allowed, somehow produced a result that felt almost luxurious. That nutty golden aroma filling a cramped apartment was what everyone needed to be hopeful of a full tummy. And you'd be forgiven for even thinking there were tomatoes or even garlic. All that was needed was good butter and the quiet understanding that simplicity, handled with absolute care, needs nothing else to be extraordinary. What came next had nothing in the pantry and everything in the heart. Maccheroni bianco. Maccheroni bianco was not born from a recipe book. It was just pasta, oil, garlic, and whatever dignity the week had left in it. Those garlic slices would be dropped into warm oil and coaxed slowly until just golden. But that's not all. The next step involved putting the pasta into the mixture. The children twirled their forks as they ate, laughing and completely unbothered. They never knew what Mama went through to put that meal on the table. And that was precisely the point. While Mama stretched what little she had indoors, the men of Little Italy were already up, hunting something far less glamorous: pasta with fresh fish and tomato sauce. Before the sun even touched the Manhattan skyline, men from Little Italy were already moving through pre-dawn streets toward the Fulton Fish Market. But they were not buying the good cuts. They were buying what everyone else left behind, from bones to heads and the small whole fish wrapped in yesterday's paper. By nightfall, those cast-offs were simmering into a tomato broth that also included garlic and herbs. Then add pasta. The children started dunking bread before anyone even sat down. That broth was thin, but every single spoonful tasted like the Mediterranean coastline they had left back home. Which pasta recipe intrigued you the most? Let us know your thoughts, and remember to subscribe to the channel for more interesting videos like this.